Hey friends, welcome back to another installment of our Book of Sorrows series. Today we have Act 5. We're halfway through all of the parts. We are getting deep into the lore now and are getting to a place that is much more familiar to many of those who have only glanced at the grimoire or who have only played story missions would recognize the lore. If you want to join in the discussion of these cards, we live stream these videos on the Dames of Destiny Twitch every Wednesday evening CST, so come and hang out with us. So let's show our Titans some love this time, grab those Grimoire books, and find a nice cozy place to read. We found a cozy place in the Dreadnought with some constellations, and I'm really enjoying this. So last time we chatted here, we were talking about the hive as a species, how it evolved from their lower forms on the fundament, and possibilities for how it evolved in each step. We theorized, well, actually the hubs would get mad at me for saying theorized, we hypothesized that in order for a hive to move from a thrall to an acolyte to a wizard or knight, they would have to cocoon themselves inside those coffins or tombs that we see kind of hanging out all over the place. And given the way that the hive reproduce, we also hypothesized that they would expand very rapidly. The cards talk about whole moons being given over to breeding and raising of warriors for the hive, and you can see this on Earth's moon, where there's a massive rift and seed ships are being sent to Earth with new spawn. And we ended last cast with the Traveler being defeated by the Sisters. This week we're biting off a huge chunk. We are going to be covering parts 21 through 28, but parts 17 and 18 are also going to be helpful. And if you have no idea what I'm talking with these parts, the Book of Sorrows is divided into 50 grimoire cards. Each one is called a part. So these parts are specific to different grimoire cards. We're going to chat about the origins of swords, and as the title of this broadcast suggests, we're going to be focusing on sword logic. What is a sword world? And what do those pesky worm gods have to do with any of this? But first we need to take a step back to an event that we kind of glossed over in part 3, the first death of Arix. Yes, we Guardians were not the first to defeat the Hive King. So how did Arix die? Well, her sister betrayed and killed her, all for wanting to have a congress with those they were at war with. Now, having a peace conference is something that runs against the very nature of the worms. They are the gods of death. To be worshipped there means that you need to kill things. Savathun kills Arix and she retreats to her sword world, which we're going to get to in a little bit. While Arix is in this other dimension, she has a very philosophical discussion on the pros and cons of the god worms versus the Leviathan and the Traveler. This conversation really puts into perspective how something that may seem evil to us is perfectly logical to another. This conversation convinces Arix to return and to destroy the Hive's enemies, and upon their victories, the sisters develop sword logic and battle each other for 20,000 years. This is kind of crazy. So let's talk about swords. What are swords actually made of? Well, we don't have any exact breakdown of the sister swords or how exactly they obtained their swords. From the descriptions, we can assume that the swords were literal pieces of the soul. They were tools of death and travel. Swords cut through creatures and dimensions, and killing with the sword gives the bearer more power. The more power you have, the more killing you can do. The more killing, the more power. It's very cyclical here. There is no mention of the three sister swords following the three elements that we have. So arc, solar, I'm forgetting the other one. Space magic. There we go. So what is in a sword world? Well, you can hear a tomb ship coming from a sword world right now, actually. A sword world is a place that stores one of the three sisters' souls. When a sister dies in the material world, they are respawned into their respective sword worlds. Arix's world is called the High War. It's a killing ground and a school of sword logic to teach others. It's also called the Court of Oryx. Savathun created the High Coven, a center of knowledge, and you see some of the missions we have to destroy a coven of wizards. and it comes from this. Xivu Arath is unique. She's the youngest sister. She's the one that focuses on being a warrior. Her sword world is wherever there is war. To me, this sounds a tad problematic. If one of the sisters dies in the material world, then they get resurrected in their sword world. But if they die in their sword world, then you are permanently dead. So if Xivu Arath's sword world is wherever there is war, if she dies in war, then she is permanently dead. And that doesn't necessarily seem logical to me. But then again, this is fantastical. It doesn't have to make logical sense. Think of it more as a play. So these sword worlds were like dual capitals of the Hive Empire. If you think back in history, think of Rome and Constantinople during the Roman Empire. Both were centers of knowledge and centers of commerce. So these two dual capitals, they were the crossroads of the Hive Empire. Through them flowed food, and by food we mean death, because they eat death. It's very interesting. And also all communication. So that's how their empire can communicate to each other. So you can kind of see in the dust here, the constellations, how like the different motes and moons are talking to one another. It is from going through these sword worlds. So what exactly does traveling to a sword world look like? Well, as you can hear and see kind of in the distance, let's see if we can't get a shot of one coming in. It is exactly like a tomb ship coming in and out. You see the green flash, and then it suddenly appears. So when a tomb ship manifests itself in the material world, it is coming from the sword world of the respective ruler. This means some of the sword logics that the sisters have learned has been incorporated into the hardware of their armies. So they know. So it's not only them that can teleport. It's the Ascendant can teleport, and then it's been incorporated into their ships as well. So let's talk about sword logic. I keep mentioning this thing, and it's in the title of the broadcast, but what does that actually mean? Well, sword logic is both a mystical discussion and a practical discussion. And there's 3 different views that I have found to take on this topic. But we're going to start with the basics on this. Sword logic was developed out of the death and resurrection of Arx. Savathun was able to study Arx's death and return, as well as the cutting wounds that were made by the worm god, and the way that the worm god cut through the silly inconvenience of death to be able to figure out how to do it, what the steps are, how to travel between worlds. So on the mystical side of this discussion, you could say they found their path to immortality, a fountain of youth, so to speak, through the wounds made by the worm god. The 20,000-year war that happened between the sisters, where they were just killing each other, they were killing their respective armies. You could say this was their form of worshiping their gods. But as much as the cards may seem mystical, sensationalist, we keep talking about the Book of Sorrows being like a play. There's a very logical and practical reason why this could be. So one of those logical reasons could be that the war is necessary for the sisters to gain skills that they need. Now, this is really easy for us as gamers, because we can see that, or we could make the argument that the sisters needed to kill and gain experience for them to learn new things. So we kill and get experience for us to learn new things about our weapons. We do that about our armor, and then we particularly do that about our subclasses, right? So our guardians weren't resurrected with immediate knowledge of being a blade dancer or a sun singer or a striker. These are learned abilities, and it takes time, and we've all experienced the grind, but can you imagine the grind for, 20,000 years? Oof. So the sisters would have to learn their own abilities as well. So that's one of the practical aspects, is they had to fill up their perk tree, so to speak. Another way to look at this that I am most inclined to doing, because The writers of Bungie called this sword logic. We're thinking of it more in like a computer-based logic sort of way. The 20,000-year war was necessary because the various manners in which the sisters died and murdered each other was a form of a predictive modeling. So if you think of computers and analysts doing this to predict outcomes under certain conditions, you're able to form contingency plans against a variety of likely possibilities and against enemies you haven't seen before. If you see similar tactics as something you've seen in the past, you have experience in dealing with that. Let's either go into a sword world, right there. You can think of this as being very similar to how the Vex core minds function. And without the sisters running themselves through the models, very experimental models because they are the ones going through it, by murdering and dying, they would not be able to make an adaptive strategy for immortality. So what about these worm gods? Where do they fall into plan? Well, if we're thinking about this as a play, this is a new conflict that has arisen with this seeming fountain of youth. The discovery of sword logic has made the worms inside the sisters grow very hungry. The more the sisters kill, the more death the worm needs to consume. This points to a very interesting duality or falsehood within our story. The idea of being able to live forever is juxtaposed against the religion of wanting to make the universe equal through death, its final form. So instead of the traveler's philosophy, where a rising tide raises all ships, we all want everybody to be in the golden age. The worms just want to blow the ships out of the water and make sure everybody sinks and be in a world of death. This causes a lot of anguish among the sisters, and they get to the point where they exterminated 18 species within a century. 18 species completely annihilated in 100 years. So they do that, that's a lot of death, that's very worshipful, and yet their worms are still hungry. The scenes of the sisters in sorrow spread like wildfire throughout the hive, and the hive begin to lose faith both in their leaders and their gods. Remember that the relationship that the sisters have with the worm gods is very symbiotic. Both advance together. The sisters have become leaders of a vast empire, and the worms are worshipped as deities. Savathun, the clever sister, comes up with a plan to sort of get rid of this little inconvenient problem where they're always being eaten at by their worms. Two of the sisters have to die in the sword world and make the map to permanent death. Xivu Arath, the youngest and strongest, volunteers first, and Arx immediately beheads her. Savathun, being very cunning, attempts to entice Arx into strangling her. She hides a blade behind her back, and we can think that, maybe she wanted to kill Arx so she could take all of the power. Arx doesn't fall for this little trick of hers, and immediately beheads Savathun. Now, having gained all of the knowledge, strength, and power of her siblings, King Arx travels to the world of the gods. And that's where our Grimoire card leads us for tonight. It is part 28, The King of Shapes, and it is worth 5 Grimoire points. This is the coronation of Oryx, the Taken King. It happened thus. In the cold abyss of the sword world, King Arash walked under a cloak of green fire. He walked through the sky, and the sky shuddered and froze beneath his feet. He walked until he found Akka, worm of secrets, who was denying a truth until it became a lie. Akka, my god, worm of secrets, I am Arax, sole king of the hive. I have come to receive a secret. I want the secret power of the deep, which you hold. I give no secrets, Akka said, whose voice was in code. No, said Oryx, you give nothing. Giving is for the sky. You worship the deep, which asks that we take what we need. Akka said nothing, because if it denied this truth, the truth might become false. But you gave us your larvae, the worm, said Oryx. This is why the worm devours us now, because it is given, not taken. So I must take what I need from you, although you are my god. Said Akka, you have not the strength. But this was a lie. Aurochs had killed Savathun, his sibling, and Xivu Arath, his sibling, and he had the sword logic of killing them. Aurochs, the first navigator, set upon his god with his sword and his words and cut Akka into pieces, and took from those pieces the secret of calling upon the deep. He wrote the secret on a set of tablets, which he calls the Tablets of Ruin, and he wore them around his waist. Then Aurochs said, "Now I may speak to the deep, the beautiful final shape. I will be the king of shapes, and I will learn all the secrets of our destiny." His speech to the deep is not recorded here, but it is known that he returned, and he said, "Now I am Aurochs, the Taken King, and I have the power to take life and make it my own." And then he went out into the universe and fought with his tablets. The worm, his god, was pleased. So what do y'all think? In what ways do you view sword logic? Is the three I identifying, or did you find like a fourth one, especially after reading that card? And how do swords tie into the final cutscene in Regicide, where Eris picks up the remnants of Aurochs' sword? Do you think she's going to be using that for good, for evil? Do you think that little crystal is like a hard drive containing all of the sword logic throughout history that Aurochs has accumulated? Pop your answers into chat or into the comment section below. We have quite a more to cover in this series, so stay tuned because the Vex are coming. Until next time, Guardians, happy reading and have a great weekend.